Another weekly roundup. Andres, thank you for joining me. We've got a couple of interesting topics to discuss today.
Hey, Kyle, happy to be here. Yeah, I think this should be a good episode.
Yeah, so let's start with Strapi Cloud. They've launched their cloud offering. What have they been saying about it?
Yeah, so Future Story and Strapi Cloud launch. They announced the release of Strapi Cloud. It's a fully managed and collaborative platform for building, deploying, and managing Strapi applications. Strapi Cloud abstracts away the complexity of infrastructure management while keeping development workflow and setting the core capabilities of Strapi. So your developers don't have to worry about managing all that technical infrastructure because Strapi can manage it using their cloud service. What I found interesting is one of the things they also mentioned in the press release is as making it the only vendor on the market offering both a self-hosted and cloud version of the same CMS. So we have some quotes from Strapi CEO Pierre Bergy. Strapi has always been committed to helping developers and teams create great digital experiences. With Strapi Cloud, we're taking this to the next level with a fully managed and scalable option that offers the best of both worlds, the ease of use of a traditional SaaS offering combined with the freedom and flexibility of open source. Some other details from the release: Strapi Cloud Pro and Team, they're the two plans available today, and they both include a server, a database, CDN, email service, generous asset storage, and bandwidth limits. So you can manage your content applications securely and scale resources vertically as needed. So a lot of things you'd expect in a typical cloud offering.
Yeah. So you and me, just before we jumped on, we were discussing this this particular sentence in the release, making it the only vendor on the market offering both a self-hosted and cloud version of the same CMS. Now, you and me were discussing this just before we hit the record button, and we were saying, well, hold on. Sitecore comes to mind, Magnolia CMS comes to mind, Crafter CMS comes to mind, Dot CMS comes to mind. Those guys have all got cloud offering and free and open source offerings, right? So, or community, or should we say community offerings?
Yeah,
now,
or on-premise, on-premise offerings. On-premise offerings. Yeah, cloud on-premise.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Just now it struck me they've said the same CMS, right? Now, that could be them saying that, hey, our competitors who have got on-premise and cloud offerings, the CMS you're getting is not the same, right? So the on-premise version is, the community version is maybe trimmed down version, hasn't got all the features that an enterprise instance would have. So maybe that's what they're saying here, and I'm not sure of the veracity of that, quite frankly. But it seems like I didn't really catch that before, but maybe that's what they're saying. I don't know if those other vendors I just mentioned or other vendors out there in the landscape are giving two different versions of the CMS when it's on premise or in the cloud. I would be inclined to think that there's at least one or two of them out there who have the same CMS version across that. I can't verify it right now, but yeah, this sentence kind of stood out to you and me as like being not really. We immediately thought like that's not really true, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
Yeah.
From my side, when I read it, I think it seems like good promotional material for the press release, and it's something good to do because you need to provide enterprises with different options. Some might want cloud, some in specific industries. If you're thinking finance and other industries, and we'll probably get into a little bit of this in the next story we'll talk about. But like certain industries, they need that tight governance, need that tight workflow, and they prefer to have everything on premise where they can keep an eye on all of their infrastructure. But in terms of the CMS offering, it's going to be more or less the same usually, whether it's on premise or in the cloud.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure why they've really like sort of put this sentence in there, unless it is a sort of a little indication that, hey, we're not going to give you two different CMSs like our competitors, if that is even true. Maybe it's that. But again, like we were discussing before we record, I don't think there's much of an overlap, if at all, of industries that want on-premise and also want cloud-based CMS, right? Like you mentioned finance, government's another one that sticks out to me, but to be honest, those are the only real two. And there's going to be a couple others, but like I can't think of any other like industry-wide, entire industries that want on-prem because of like data security reasons and that kind of thing, like government and finance would do. maybe healthcare. I guess healthcare is another one.
Yeah,
But
healthcare
like, yeah,
regulations as well.
yeah, exactly. So I'm not sure who that speaks to. Like, I'm not sure there's any company out there saying, "Hey, we absolutely need both versions of Strapi running at once." And there probably is a couple of use cases out there, but it seems like a very niche,
Yeah.
reality, if that is a reality. So yeah, I'm not sure why they come out with that, unless it is just a little indirect to their competitors saying, "Hey, we haven't trimmed down the community version, the on-premise version in any way, so our developers are getting the real deal without having to pay the enterprise pricing." Maybe that's what they're getting at here, but again, we're not sure how unique that is in the market, to be frank. But anyway, this is not to put a negative spin on this. This is good news for Strapi. Obviously, massive engineer developer community using Strapi. Whenever you look into the Reddit discussions around the best headless CMSs, or ones that are sort of being used by engineers and developers to try and build things from scratch without budget, Strapi is always coming up in conversations, and for good reason. It's a very, very capable CMS. So this is good news. It's good news for them, good news for their customers, and probably good news for the developer community as well. It's good to see that they've kept that. They're keeping that free and open source on-premise part of Strapi going. They're not sort of pivoting away from that in any way. So that's good news. So yeah, good for Strapi.
Yep, agreed.
Cool. What's next?
Next up, we have the role of the traditional DXP in a composable world. So we had two stories in the report that kind of touched on this topic from different angles. So the first one, does the integrated enterprise DXP still hold value in the composable era? And this comes from, it's a CMS Wire article written by Ryan Bennett. He's the CEO and founder of the digital experience agency Silogy. And the article speaks about that exact question. So will there still be the integrated traditional enterprise monolithic type DXP, as everyone seems to be pushing composability? Where does that monolithic DXP fit into just enterprises and software and CMS choices? So some of the main points in the article are composable DXPs or headless publishing can provide a more flexible and agile platform, but is this likely to be enough to provoke a change? So is this enough for enterprises to say, hey, we definitely need composable, we definitely need headless? DXPs are moving over from PaaS to SaaS, something we just mentioned with Strapi, offering previously integrated services independently, improving their APIs, and ramping up their headless CMSs. So the article, Ryan also presents three situations where monolithic DXP could be a better fit for specific companies. First of all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Basically, I think one of the problems with, we kind of mentioned a lot, if you talk about in terms of monolithic platforms, is there's problems delivering to multiple channels, and maybe there may be problems with security, maintenance, whatever. But not every company is going to have these problems. So if they don't have any issues with their existing CMS, they're probably not thinking about changing to headless just for the sake of it. Also, organizations that need tight governance, workflows, and security. So those integrated features of the traditional DXP, they give them exactly what they need to accomplish that. And then there's some that need to keep sophisticated native DSP features. So there's some DXPs, DSPs that offer dynamic personalization on the fly, sophisticated sales tracking, and all of that is integrated within their DXP, their model DXP, the traditional platform. So they don't have to then search for an accompanying piece of software to help provide that flexibility. So those are the kind of the three instances that where a monolithic DSP could be a better fit.
Yeah.
And,
Let me just interrupt you there, because before I forget my train of thought on this. So those final 2 points, I think they're good arguments. Organizations that need tight governance and security, like we just mentioned before, with the whole Strapi story. That's a good reason to stick with monolith and not take that risk, especially if you're gonna, you've got something on big and on premise under your control versus several microservices up in the cloud, different clouds. I get that. That's a good argument. The third point he made is you've got something sophisticated already built. To pull that apart and try and build it again, is that worth that risk? That's debatable, but again, a relatively good argument for why sticking with what you have, it could make sense on a case by case basis. The first point, I don't agree with at all, actually, though. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is problematic from a couple of angles. Firstly, I don't think this argument really holds up to like the modern day human, right? So we're in like we're in the age of tech, we're in the age of the iPhone. We're up, and we're sort of upgrading our phones, or if you're Android, even same deal. Every year, you don't need to update your phone or upgrade your phone. You're still paying through the nose to do so. It's just become part of like wanting to stay up to date with technology, or latest trends. You don't want to fall behind, fear of missing out, all that kind of stuff. And that translates, to up to the enterprise, right? Because in the day, enterprises are just huge organizations of people made up of people like you and me, right? Who have these same sort of habits. They also upgrade their iPhone every year, right? So I'm not sure it really fits from that perspective. But the bigger point would be, if that's a sort of a dangerous position to take, especially if you're a big company, right? If it's not broke, we won't fix it. It reminded me of like the Airbnb sort of launch way back when, and there was when they started gaining traction, there was a lot of talk of why didn't the hotels do this, right? Why didn't the hotels disrupt themselves, right? I think I was listening to a few Gary Vaynerchuk videos at the time where it's like, this is why being a big company is difficult and dangerous, right? Because you move slowly and you forget to disrupt yourself, and then you get disrupted by another company, another startup who's using the latest technology, who's a bit more agile than you, who isn't bogged down by all those those sophisticated native DXP features maybe, and they can move quicker and they can innovate faster, and before you know it, they've disrupted you, right? So that thinking of, if it's not broke, don't fix it, I think that's dangerous. Like, just purely from a business perspective, I think that's dangerous. So I don't think you necessarily need to see glaring issues with your legacy CMS, with your monolith CMS to trigger that move. But again, I think you mentioned as well, I think a lot of companies are seeing big issues. But even for the ones that are not, if that's the only reason that you're just not seeing a huge issue right now, that's probably not the best reason to not consider it, because of what I just said, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I will also play devil's advocate a bit on that, because I think, and this could be just based on the article itself. Like, when they mention it's composable versus traditional, not necessarily. I think as the industry evolves, like, just making this up basically, but I feel like we'll start to get different categories again, where it's legacy, custom, traditional, monolithic, composable. And I think those definitely, like, legacy, like, who aren't even trying to provide that headless option and whatever else, I think that's going to be a completely different category. And companies who are on that type of software, they will regret not considering composable, not considering headless, for the reason you mentioned. I think in the more traditional monolithic style, then, which is still like a bigger integrated piece of piece of software, but still have the headless option and stuff in there as well. I think that's going to be a different situation.
You could be right about that. But again, even then, I still think it's like for a certain type of company, where again, maybe again, that third point coming in, where they've built up something so complex and intricate over the last decade that, like, putting it apart just wouldn't make sense. But hey, we're with a company that's also got this headless, content arm, and that's helping us do the omnichannel stuff more, and integrating. They've released, it made it easier for us to just integrate different SaaSes and different microservices. That could work. I agree, that could work.
Yeah. And just a few other points that were mentioned in the article. So it mentions that some vendors are undecided about where they want to focus their attention, whether that's a composable or a traditional approach. So, like we've seen in the last few months, Sitecore's brought on a lot more. For instance, Sitecore's been traditional CMS, traditional DXP. They've now give their customers option composable. Other traditional vendors are doing similar things as well, just kind of experimenting with the more focus on headless and composability. And basically, one of the other arguments is that these sort of companies will want to make it easier for customers to adopt headless or composable, because even though, which is another interesting for that specific type of category, even if they do offer a headless option, it might not be that easy to implement it and actually get the best of like headless or composability just based on how the existing architecture and the rest of the stack is set up. But what they're suggesting is that we might see some vendors offering options for only their composable or headless CMS, and then they could be forced. They could essentially force their existing customers who are on the traditional monolithic DXP to say, okay, well, you kind of have to now move towards this composable thing with us. And I think that's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out. There's another article that we featured, which doubles down the other side of the coin from composable experiences to composable enterprises, from Deepak and Nupali for ReadWrite. And in this article, it talks about some of the things we mentioned on previous podcast episodes, like the benefits of composability, get that modularity, autonomy, enterprises, and then explains a bit more about the focus on digital experience composition, developers building, business users composing and orchestrating the experiences. So I think we can have now two sides of the coin here about like, okay, traditional might be good for us here, but this composability thing, I don't think it's going away. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think even companies who are kind of experimenting with it, they're going to find themselves in a situation where it's like, okay, well, we have to now 100% go this route because this seems to be the main thing. I think we're seeing that with like DXCs growing in popularity. A lot of companies are adopting marketplaces or expanding marketplaces to provide that integrations and options. And I think what we're going to have is going to ultimately be determined by what their customers say. So if these companies like provide that composable option and say, you can only get this with your composable option, but if there's a ton of pushback from enterprises paying them millions of dollars every year, then you can see a pivot again. So it's all going to be with the customer.
I agree with you. I think, composable is the future, right? And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, excuse me, and you've got a counter argument to that, then what I would say is consider that there are billion-dollar companies in this space. And you mentioned Sitecore. It's pretty obvious that, they themselves, they would have sat down and said, look, this is a year or two ago, this was, pretty much against the entire ethos, the entire foundation of what Sitecore was, right? A traditional monolith piece of software. They themselves have said, okay, we're not going to defend our position. There's actually a lot of benefit in this new way. We're going to pivot. And they've spent the last 2 years pivoting, and they're still pivoting. So if the billion-dollar companies in the space are accepting this new paradigm shift, then that's telling you a lot, right? And they're not the only ones. We're seeing, again, Adobe AEM slowly but surely talking about headless and composability a bit more as well. This is happening, and even the biggest companies in the space who had a good reason to resist it are openly not resisting it; they're joining it, right? So that's that. What the article mentioning that there may be a time where these legacy monolithic platforms but kind of force their customers to move over to their composable offering. I can see that happening. Not anytime soon, but I can see end of life for these legacy systems where, hey, a year from now, we're no longer going to be supporting, X, Y, and Z platform or product. We're going to be focusing over on these products over here, kind of forcing, everybody to move over. I can see that happening. Not anytime soon, because as we've discussed before, as we've discussed with other agencies in the space, there's a lot of enterprises out there who have, very much active contracts, very much, recently signed contracts on these old legacy systems where they're in the middle of, a 1, 2, 3 year project to migrate over from another system into that legacy system, right? So they don't want to upset those customers of theirs. So it's gonna take time. We're looking at years here for this shift to happen, but this shift is not going to be like, an overnight thing, right? We're saying like 1 or 2 years. We're not saying, at some point in 2025, in May, there'll be a huge shift. No, it will be a gradual shift, which has already started, right? And it's just going to pick up pace essentially. So that's an interesting few points that he brought up. So that's well worth a read, I think, for anybody who hasn't read that article.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. I think we've wrapped up our wrap up again. Andres, thank you once again, and I'll speak to you again next week.
Yep. See you next week. Huh?